Hey everyone, this is Rebel Heart Rose. Bear with me. It's been it's been one heck of a day. It really has. Okay. Continuing Xena's adventures. This chapter, first chapter, I'm going to read Homecoming. This is by Gary A. Brombeck and Lucy A. Snyder. It was a perfect evening. The twilight was achingly gorgeous. Clouds of just delicate purples and reds and oranges framed the dying sun. And on the opposite side of the sky, the moon was rising in a silvery crescent. The cool, aching breeze was filled with the scent of wild jasmine, and the only sounds were the pine needles crackling beneath Argo's hooves, and the quiet creak of the saddle, and Xena's leather armor. Gabrielle wished she could freeze time and hold the evening in her mind forever. Indeed, evenings did not come in any more lovely or peaceful than this. So this feeling probably won't last much longer, thought Gabrielle. It never does. As if the gods didn't want to disappoint her. That was the moment something happened. A low rumbling thunder rippled through the clearing sky. The air was suddenly electric, and the hairs on the back of Gabrielle's arms rose as her body was washed in chill. The rumble rose and rose until the ground practically shook, and Gabrielle finally saw it. A shooting star. The meteor flamed bright as it tore across the sky, coming closer and closer. Xena whispered an oath, her eyes widened at the sight. Argo whinnied and reared in fright. Steady, steady, girl. Xena slid out of the saddle and reined in her second steed. A scared steed. Xena, it's coming right for us, Gabrielle said, looking frantically around for something to hide behind. The meteor screamed as it fell earthward in a steep angle. The green tops of the tail pines nearby ignited as the star's fiery corona grazed them, and both Xena and Gabrielle were knocked flat by the sudden blast of sound and heat and an incredible boom as the earth jolted and the meteor smashed into the ground 100 yards away and drove forward with a might to rival the wrath of the gods. And then it was over. Gabrielle climbed to her feet with the aid of her staff and stared at the charred 10-foot wide track the meteor had gouged through the forest. Her knees felt rubbery as she realized precisely how close they'd come. They'd just come to dying. Is it a good omen or a bad omen that thing almost killed us? Gabrielle tried to make it sound like a joke, but her voice was shaking far too badly. Xena was petting Argo and whispered reassurances in the horse's ear. The poor beast was shivering, but slowly calming down. I always take survival as a good omen, Xena said as she paused, staring at the turret track. We should go see if anyone was less fortunate than us. Gabrielle followed as Xena began to lead her horse toward the track. I don't see how anyone could have survived if they were caught in the path of that thing. If they didn't survive, they'll need a decent burial. And I want to find that meteor. Lila once told me that the iron from a fallen star makes a far finer sword than any earthly metal. Xena drew her sword and examined the edge with a critical eye. This blade has served me well, but it's got some deep nicks. I know a good swordsmith in Amphipolis who owes me some work. Everyone you know owes you something, murmured Gabrielle. And what's wrong with that? Nothing if you're a tax collector. No wonder people are always trying to kill you. What's life without friends? Replied Xena as they made their way toward the impact site. The charred ground crunched beneath their boots. Fortunately, none of the fires started by the fallen star had spread. The forest was green and the ground well soaked from recent spring rains. The track continued for another mile, and in the dying light, they finally saw it. A flattened silver egg that was a little smaller than one of the great elephants Gabrielle had seen in the traveling animal shows from Egypt. The egg, which was mostly buried in the earth it had plowed into, was covered in strange hieroglyphs. It was cracked down the middle, and a blue light glowed through the finger-wide fracture. That doesn't look like any fallen star I've ever heard of, Xena said. Gabrielle heard a baby's frightened wail. The tiny voice was faint and strangely distorted. It didn't sound entirely human. Did you hear that? Gabrielle asked, feeling oddly dizzy. Hear what? Gabrielle heard the cry again, though she couldn't quite make out where the voice was coming from. It was almost as if she heard it inside her own head. She stepped up to the egg and put her hands against the silvery shell. The metal was still hot, but not too hot to touch. Gabrielle, don't touch that. I think there's a baby inside. We need to get him out. She stuck the butt of her staff into the crack and began to lever the crack open wider. Can you help with this? Xena joined her, and together the two women pride, pulled and pried at the egg, at the crack in the egg. The metal shell gave away with a groan. The two halves rocked apart and shimmered, then collapsing into twinkling motes of stardust. There on the ground lay an extraordinary, homely infant, swaddled in a fine gray cloth. The baby's skin was a deep malted blue, and his head was topped with a fuzz of shocking red hair. His eyes were black as ripe olives. Gabrielle knelt and picked up the baby. The moment she touched him, her mind was filled with a kaleidoscope of images. The terror of birth, Angry voices, accusation, fear. A quiet place, mother's whisper. Don't worry, little one. I'll send you down to a pretty mountain while I talk some sense into your papa. I'll get you tomorrow night when things have calmed down. Gentle hands placing him in the silver egg, the egg floating earthward, then the cold, black shadow of brother's jealous, paranoid rage. You should never have been born, bastard brat. A powerful blow and the dizzying, sickening sensation of the egg falling from the sky. The bone-jarring impact, the roar of flames, the bitter smoke. The baby's fear and confusion were a palpable vibration that coursed through Gabriel's body. He blinked up at her as if to say, What's happened? Where's my mama? I don't know where your mama is, Gabrielle whispered, but it's okay, you're safe now. The image of the mountain flashed through her mind. Again, Gabrielle recognized it. Mount Empoli, a day's travel away. Xena stepped up to her and pulled back the cloth covering the infant's face. His little blue head was as round as a honeydew, and his huge black eyes were wide with fright. That's one ugly baby. He's not ugly. Xena sighed, leaned in for a closer look, then pulled away. Gabrielle, I have seen many babies in my life. Cute ones, beautiful ones, chubby ones. And I'm telling you that the sight of this thing, baby, whatever, the sight of this baby would make me, Medusa, shriek and run for cover. I think he's kind of cute. Cute for a monster, maybe. Xena! He isn't a monster! I didn't say he was. Xena's blue eyes flashed with indignation. Yes, you did. I heard you. Think it. Gabrielle trailed off, her eyes widening with realization. You heard my thoughts? Xena asked incredulously. Girl's getting high from all this smoke. It's not the smoke, Xena. I can hear what you're thinking. No, you can't. That's impossible. Can, can't, can, fine. Then what am I thinking now? You're thinking I've lost my mind, and you wish we'd never gone looking for the fallen star, and your left toe hurts from kicking that hard-headed pirate last week, and you're wishing you could scratch that itch in your... Okay, enough! So you can read my mind. Told you. Why can you suddenly do this? Gabrielle looked down at the baby. I think he's done it so he can communicate with me. And what exactly are we supposed to do with it? Xena asked. I don't know about you, but I'm not known for my tender maternal instincts. Gabrielle touched the baby's cheek. Once again, she got a clear image of the mountain. We need to take him to the top of Mount Empoli. The baby's mother told him she would be there to get him tomorrow night. I know where it is. Xena, it's just a day away to the west. There's some really great wild grapes growing on the south face. Damnation! We're supposed to be in Amphipolis 4 days from now. This side trip is going to make me miss my mother's birthday party. Gabrielle shrugged. It's not like you remember to get her anything. Xena looked at her feet, embarrassed. There's a merchant in Amphipolis who specializes in helping thoughtless daughters who forget to buy their mother a birthday present. Well, of course it sounds bad when you say it like that. Gabrielle got an image in her head of Xena kissing Saul, Amphipolis' very buff young blacksmith, and laughed loudly. It's not your mother's party you're worried about missing, is it? Well, I've heard Saul's Forge is pretty hot. Stay out of my mind, Xena snapped. Then stop thinking so loud. Gabrielle looked at the baby and became serious. Xena, we have to take this side trip. It's not like we can just give this baby to the nearest county farmer to raise. He doesn't belong here. We've got to get him back to his mother. Xena sighed. All right, you win. You're right. Besides, it's nice around here this time of year. It'll be a fun trip, and what's the worst that can possibly happen to us way out here in the countryside? A few bars of twanging lyre music jangled through the evening air. Dang, a dang, 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 dang. You had to ask, said Gabrielle. Xena leaped to her feet, drawing her chakram with her left hand. Gabrielle stood with her, the baby cradled in the crook of her left arm, and her staff at the ready in her right hand. Who's there? Called Xena. A dozen people in gold-trimmed white robes emerged from the trees. A few of them carried lyres and tambourines, and others carried tall staffs. A tall, thin man with a shock of grey-black hair stepped forward. Greetings, strangers. I welcome you to our forest. My name is Seftis. Xena inclined her head in greeting, but she did not put down her chakram. You're Asterians, aren't you? Star worshippers. Cedric smiled indulgently. That's an oversimplification, but yes, we are Asterians. Our oracle told us that one of the Star Mother's chariots would fall from the sky tonight and that a child would survive. He nodded at the swaddled baby. Is that the child? Xena nodded. Septus clapped his hands. Oh, what wonderful news that such kind strangers were here to save the babe from certain death. Please give us the star child. We will ensure that he is returned to his people. Gabrielle took a step back, shaking her head in her mind. She could see the baby lying naked on a cold stone altar. Septus stood above the child, muttering incantations as he raised high a silver-bladed knife. No, you're going to kill him, she said. Septus laughed. Nonsense! He won't die. He will be reborn as a new star, and the blood he renders into us will ensure a beautiful harvest next year. Crazy freaks, Gabriel heard Xena think. Xena stepped grimly forward, drawing her sword with her free hand. You can't have him. But you must understand, said Cephas, in an annoying sing-song voice, that the blood of a star child, besides ensuring a bountiful harvest, also possesses remarkable curative powers, and the warlord upon whose land we have erected our holy temple suffers from a terrible degenerative skin disease. The blood of this child will cure him, and thus ensure that the Asterian temple will remain standing, a beacon to the true believers who shall travel. Do you ever stop to take a breath? Or are you that in love with the sound of your own voice? Spat Xena. Cephas's face darkened. Give us the child. The musicians had put down their instruments and opened their robes to retrieve stubbed clubs. The others brought their staves to the ready. Over my dead body, Xena hissed. As you wish. And it was such a lovely evening, too. Septus looked toward the others and said, Take her. The occultist rushed forward, ready to bring the two women, ululating wildly. Xena catapulted herself toward the mob, swinging sword and flinging chakram. And that's when something else happened. Gabrielle instinctively pulled the baby closer to her chest and looked down to make sure that he was all right. And as she did so, the baby closed his eyes tightly and began to make the softest of mewling sounds. And the more he made the sound, the louder it became. And the louder the sound became, the more the baby's face turned from its usual blue to an increasingly deeper purple. You pick a, you pick now to make your first poopy? Thought Gabrielle. But a moment later she knew that wasn't the case at all. Because as the cultists rushed Xena swinging down with their clubs and staves, the weapons suddenly met with resistance and were bounced backward out of their hands. Xena's weapons met the same fate. Her chakram, which she'd flung at the noggin of a particular burly estrian, wanged off the invisible wall and knifed harmlessly into the ground. As she swung her sword to parry another cultist club, her sword bounced back with such force she had to use both hands to hold on to the weapon. The cultists retrieved their weapons, tried again, but could not strike Xena. Well, this is interesting, said Xena, retrieving her chakram. It was then that Gabrielle caught a glint of multicolored light reflecting off something smooth and curved above Xena's head. The more she stared at it, the more Gabrielle came to realize that what she was seeing was the light of the setting sun glittering off the surface of something like a large bubble that surrounded her. Xena and Argo. She looked at the baby and smiled. He's doing it, Xena. The baby is protecting us. Xena sheathed her sword and looked first at the baby. Its face was still purple and intense with the effort of generating the invisible wall. Then at the bewildered and powerless cultist, suddenly I found this child much more attractive. You better, said Gabrielle. But look at him. It's hurting him. He can't keep this up much longer. She looked at Xena. Do you have some sort of plan? Xena quickly mounted Argo and extended her hand for Gabrielle to join her. Fleeing springs to mine. Come on. Gabrielle took Xena's hand and climbed up onto Argo's back, slipping one hand around Xena's waist. That's right, yeah! Xena dug in her heels and snapped hard on Argo's reins, and the horse took off at a strong gallop. The protective field remained around them even as they moved at such speed. The cultists chased them for a little while, but Argo's speed soon proved too much for them. Many of them turned and ran back to mount horses of their own. The baby let out a sigh of relief soon after, and Gabrielle knew the invisible armor was no longer surrounding them. He protected us for as long as he could, said Gabrielle, pulling the baby close and listening to him breathe. He seemed to be all right, but how could she be certain with such an unworldly child? He opened his dark eyes and looked at her, and smiled. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. Good boy, she whispered. Thank you. The road they now found themselves traveling was little more than a rutted tract of hard-packed dirt meandering through a skeletal tunnel of near barren tree branches. The night became an unusually cold one, and the trees, sensing this, seemed to slumber against the chill. Tendrils of mist snaked from between the trees and lay across the road like a blanket of living snow, shifting, curling, reaching upward ensnarl, to ensnarl Argo's legs for just a moment before dissolving into nothingness. Overhead, the moonlight straggled through the branches, creating diffused columns of foggy light that to Gabrielle's frayed nerves became fingers from a giant, ghostly hand that at any moment would fist together and crush all of them. She was aware, as if in deep nightmare, of shadows following along from either side of the road, silent, misshapen things, spiriting along with the mist for a while until she snapped her head toward them. Then they would disappear in slow degrees, mocking her anxiety, melting back into the darker, unexplored areas of the night silent forest. These shadows called to mind far too many campfire tales and old wives' stories of the strange woodland creatures, neither fully human nor fully beast, that were said to inhabit the section of the land. Not the most inviting of paths, is it? Said Xena. I was just thinking the same thing. Have you seen them? Seen what? Xena looked over her shoulder. Those figures trying to hide themselves in the trees behind us. Yes. Do you think they might be the creatures that the legends speak of? I think they're Assyrian scouts. But how could they have picked up our trail? They're fanatics, Gabrielle, not idiots. She hastened Argo's step. Listen, whispered Xena. If those are Assyrian scouts, then it might be best if you stay close to my thoughts. Any unnecessary conversation might alert these things that we are aware of them. We need to find a place to rest. The baby can't be out in this cold. There's a farmhouse ahead. Can you see it? Gabrielle squinted her eyes against the night and could make out the shape of an old structure of some kind. I see something. Shelter, shelter. Xena gave Argo's reins a sharp snap, and the horse broke into a trot. Gabrielle? Yes? About that staying close to my thoughts thing. Uh-huh. Well, if you happen to see Saul around, I'd appreciate some privacy. I never get to have any fun. The farmhouse was dark, and so they crept by it and decided instead to stay in the massive barn that lay several hundred yards away from the house. Once again, Gabrielle was delighted to find that it was rather warm, and there was plenty of hay for them to use against the night chill, and best of all, there was a nanny goat to provide milk for the baby. She hoped the baby would accept the milk, and he did, rather hungrily. He worked up quite an appetite for himself, said Gabrielle. He saved us from a nasty little mess. That's for sure, replied Xena. If he wants to eat the damn goat, I'll kill it and put it on a spit over a fire. She paused and added, could you let him know I said I'd do that for him? I think he should know I'm on his side. But do you think he's cute? Said Gabrielle, holding the baby up for Xena to take. Xena winced, swallowed once, then took hold of the baby and held him out in front of her as if he were something smelly she'd found by the side of the road. I think he's a Adorable. Gabrielle smiled. Only adorable? You're really going to make me pay for calling him ugly, aren't you? That is my plan, yes. Xena sighed in frustration, then pulled the baby a little closer to her. I think he's lovely. I think he's gorgeous. Why in the world? History of history itself. Never has there been a more remarkable, beautiful, angelic, breathtaking, dazzling, wondrous child than this one. He knows you're making fun of me, and he doesn't appreciate it. How do you know what he's thinking? Can you read his mind as well? No. Then how can you be sure that he feels that way? Because he just peed on your boots. Tina looked down. Oh. Then, looking at the baby. Sorry, I didn't mean to make fun of Gabrielle. I do think you're pretty adorable, though. Only adorable, said Gabrielle. Don't start with me. Okay. A few minutes later, Xena's boots satisfactorily wiped clean, and Argo, happy with a bag of oats they found by the door, Xena and Gabrielle climbed up into the hayloft, covered themselves and the baby against the chill of the night, and soon fell asleep. In the morning, they would continue their journey to Mount Empoli, providing, of course, that nothing else happened. Gabrielle awoke to the sound of voices. She peered down through the gaps in the loft boards and saw Ares, the handsome god of war, facing Xena in the barn. What do you want, Ares? Xena asked. You're in over your head, Xena. This baby is bad news for all of us. Ares stroked his black goatee thoughtfully. We'd all be better off if you'd kill the brat and be on your way to Amphipolis. Xena stepped close to him. Kill him? Why is one little baby such a threat to big bad Ares, huh? It it shouldn't have been born, Xena. It will upset the balance of things. Zeus doesn't like it, and neither do I. Ares took a breath as if he were going to elaborate, then seemed to think better of it. Just kill it, Xena. Kill it and be on your way. If you don't, I can almost guarantee you'll be dead before midnight. Xena laughed contemptuously. Oh, like I've never heard that one before. I have no intention of hurting this child, Ares. And I have even less intention of getting myself killed. Get out of here. You've wasted your breath and my time. Ares glared at her. Someday, Xena, you're going to say the wrong thing to me at the wrong time, and it's not going to be pretty. Before Xena could respond, Ares was gone, and the baby was awake and mewling for more goat's milk. Thank you, said Gabrielle. Why are you thanking me? You could have said yes to Ares. Tell me something I don't know. Gabrielle looked down at the baby. He needs us. I know. Gabrielle took Xena's hand. Have I told you recently how wonderful I think you are? I'm touched. I'm moved. I tingle. Xena pulled her hand away. Let's get ourselves together and get the hell out of here before Ares decides to pull something. What are you doing in my barn? Demanded a voice behind him. They turned and saw a burly middle-aged man in a simple green farmer's tunic standing in the doorway, brandishing a wooden pitchfork. Gabrielle quickly covered the baby's face with his swaddling cloth before the farmer could get a good look. She began. We're just travelers, and we came upon your barn late last night. We were dead on our feet, and we didn't want to wake you, Xena said. We can pay for the oats and milk we've taken. Say, you look familiar, the farmer frowned in brief concentration. But then his face brightened into excitement. You're Xena, the warrior princess! Oh, what an honor it is to have you in my barn! You saved my sister and her kids from Draco at Potidia. Your sister lives in Potidia? Asked Gabrielle, surprised to meet someone this far south who knew of her hometown. Yes, she's a weaver named Chloe. Long auburn hair, 3 kids, and a husband named Aristus. Oh, I know her, Gabrielle began. Look, we've really got to get back on the road, Xena said, nudging Gabrielle with her elbow. It's a long way to Acton. We can trust no one, Xena thought pointedly. Oh, please don't go so soon. And the farmer joined us for breakfast. My wife is cooking eggs and porridge, and she's got the most amazing story about a child who fell from the stars last night. She's been dying to tell the tale to someone besides me. Apparently, her church is looking all over for the baby. There's even supposed to be a reward for anyone who has news of the child's location. He stared at the swelling infant in Gabriel's arms. You two haven't heard anything about a star child, have you? Not a thing. Gabriel smiled at him sweetly. We thank you for your offer, but we really must be on our way, Xena said. In that case, I wish you a safe and speedy journey. The farmer saluted Xena and headed back to the house. Gabriel carried the baby to the goat to give him some more milk and to change him while Xena gathered their equipment and saddled Argo. We've got to get out of here before his wife comes out to chat, Xena said. I don't remember any woman in the group that attacked us yesterday. Maybe she won't recognize us, Gabriel said. It's not worth the risk. Bad enough her husband saw us. Hopefully my story about us going to Actum will throw them off our trail. They rode all day, stopping only to change the baby and for a brief lunch of grapes from an abandoned vineyard and dried meat and hard cheese from Argos saddlebags. The sun was just dropping before the horizon when they came to the foot of Mount Impeli. Are you sure this is the place? Xena asked. Yes, I've been getting very clear images from the baby. Now all we have to do is get to the top and wait. Wild grapes and olive trees grew along the mountain slopes, and the top of the mountain was weathered bare rock. They left Argo in a cusp of trees near the base and began their climb. The climb was much steeper than either of them had anticipated, and for a few minutes they had to stop so Xena could fashion a basket to hold the baby, one which Gabrielle could carry upon her back like a quiver. It took them longer to gather the wood and vines to do this, and by the time they began their climb again, the moon was rising high in the night sky. Gabrielle, at Xena's instance, took the lead. She came to the bulge, went over, placed her foot firmly on the edge, and found a solid hold on what felt like a root with her left hand. Pulling upward, kneeing and toeing into the blessedly cooperative stone, kicking steps into the shell-like rock where she could, Gabrielle positioned both hands and one foot before moving into a new higher position. The mountain was starting to shudder in her face and against her chest. Her own breath was whistling and humming crazily against the stone. The rocks were steep, and she labored backbreakingly for every inch. Her shoulders were tiring, and her calves ached and the muscles in her arms felt like iron. Panic was courting her, reminding her that her fear of heights was perhaps the greatest terror in her life. And now she had gone and put herself halfway up one of the steepest mountains in all the land, and it was only the thought of the baby she carried upon her back and what she would see somewhere above that kept her going. Taking hold of a firm root in the mountainside, Gabrielle pulled in a deep breath, counted 3, then released it as she pulled herself up another 9 inches over a small outcropping and reached a wide ledge that was only a few dozen yards from the summit. She did not see the shadows moving behind the large stones that surrounded her, nor did Xena until a bolt shot forth and went straight through her chest, emerging in a straight, deadly, bloody line from her back. Xena's eyes met Gabrielle's the moment before. Septus and a small group of Estrians began to emerge from their hiding places. Gabrielle's heart shattered at the sight of Xena, powerful, indestructible Xena, dropping to her feet and falling backward, blood trickling from her mouth. Gabrielle moved toward her. "No!" came Xena's silent command. "The child, Gabrielle. You have to think of the child. Get him to the top of the mountain. You can't waste time on me." "Xena!" screamed Gabrielle. "I am sorry," said Savages, kneeling down and pressing the palm of his hand against the bolt, pressing it in deeper. Gabrielle began backing up the mountain toward the summit. She felt Xena weakening. This was by far the deadliest wound the great warrior princess had ever suffered, and if something wasn't done to help her soon, Septus rose to his feet, surrounded by his followers, all of whom now pointed their crossbows at Gabrielle and the baby. "If you willingly give him to us," the Austrian leader said, "then we will let you live. If you refuse, then we will kill you where you stand." "Go to hell!" Septus's eyes grew dark and cold. "Don't think I won't tell them to fire. If a bolt should happen to hit the child, well, that would be a problem if it died before the sacred ceremony. But we have ways of staunching the loss of any blood." Gabrielle looked at Xena, remembered her friend's command, then turned and ran, all she had in her, with all she had in her. Septus gave the command, and the Estrians fired their crossbows. Though each Estrian had aimed carefully, no bolt struck its target, for the baby had once again closed his eyes and, purple-faced, raised the invisible wall of armor around Gabrielle. She knew that he would have done it sooner had he sensed any danger, but the Astrians had surprised him as much as they had Xena and Gabrielle. But this time the field did much more than protect Gabrielle. It lifted her from the surface of the mountain and held her in its invisible grasp. Shrieking, then taking a deep breath in order to keep her wits about her, Gabrielle opened her eyes and saw that the baby, perhaps growing stronger each time he uses his powers, had commanded this field to lift not only her, but Xena and the profoundly confused Argo as well. Tears streaming down her cheeks, Gabrielle looked upward toward the night sky, saw a flash of what she had first thought was lightning, and then gasped as that bolt of lightning expanded and curved. becoming solid and wide and so very, very large. She was looking at a giant floating pyramid made from the very silvery metal as the baby's meteor egg, only it was easily twice the size of the mountain and shone bright as the full moon. A door opened at the base of the pyramid, and a sunset-colored light bled down, pulling her, the baby Xena's unconscious form, and Argo upward. And as Xena stared into the light mesmerized, she asked the baby a question. What's going on? And was suddenly overwhelmed by the tidal wave of sensations. She heard thoughts and sensed dreams and absorbed myriad impressions as they were passed from psyche to psyche, with compulsive speed and more sensory layers than her brain, anyone's brain, anything's brain, could possibly absorb. The atmosphere was packed with millions upon millions of twirling, drifting, reeling bits of consciousness. At that moment, she was attuned to the majestic cacophony to such a degree that she heard a plaintive and delicately strained as any rhapsody the murmur of every cell, the percussive sounds of termites banging their heads against the floors of their dark resonating nest, the drumming feet of mice, the synchronic rustling made by flowing blood as it brushed against arterial walls, the clicking of synapses, the introverted cries of a million lonely people, shrieking their anguish into the cold, empty, uncaring night. And Gabrielle realized that somewhere underlying all life there was a continual music of living that had been playing since life began, and that its sounds, its rhythms and pulses and tones were the refrain of something more, the distant memory of the chorus from an earlier song, a suborganic score for transposing the inanimate random matter of chaos into the enigmatic, lavish, magnificent, improbable, ordered dance of living forms, rearranging matter and consciousness into miraculous symmetry, away from probability against entropy, lifting everything toward a sublime awareness so acute, so incandescent and encompassing, she thought everything within her would burst into flames, for the blinding want underneath it all. And in this communion, she was given the answer to several secrets about the universe, about the worlds within the worlds that she passed through every day without even realizing it. And though much of this knowledge was hidden away in her mind, echoes of knowledge and magic and the power of the gods, even though she experienced all of these sensations without actually comprehending them, the baby's response, its gift of celestial communion, nonetheless gave her the courage to go on. A blink, a burst of light, a pressure in her chest that she was certain would cause her heart to burst, and she felt something hard and cold beneath her back. She opened her eyes to find herself in a pale gray room that seemed to be made of from clouds. The vaporous edges of the cloud walls shifted constantly, curling and uncurling, to form an endless procession of arcane hieroglyphs. Standing before Gabrielle was a tall, beautiful Egyptian woman with skin the blue of a clear summer sky. Her night black robe shimmered with 1,000 stars. She held the star child in her arms. I am Nuit, goddess of the sky. I thank you for saving my little one. She smiled down at the baby, who gurgled happily in response. He is the son of your father, God Zeus. We should not have made love, but Zeus certainly has a share of masculine wiles. My husband, Geb, the earth god, was angry for a while, but I have calmed him. Unfortunately, the little one's older brother, Set, fears any competition. When I tried to speak the baby safely down to the mountaintop while I spoke to Jeb, Set interfered and made sure the Asterians would find him. He also convinced your god of war that the child is a danger to both our pantheons. The child is no danger to anyone, God or man, and I have plans to keep him out of the affairs of both worlds from now on. Again, you have my deepest thanks for helping my child. You're welcome, I guess. Gabriel, looking around, and saw that Xena had been laid on a cloud altar. Can you help her? She gestured at Xena. Of course. A simple request. Newitt raised her hand, and the bolt protruding from Xena's chest shimmered, dissolved into a million particles of gray tint light, and vanished. The wound in Xena's chest began to close, and pulling back in her spilled blood. And in a few moments Gabrielle heard her friend groan and mutter, "Oh, damnation! How many horses fell on me anyway?" Gabrielle started over toward the table and was stopped when Newitt placed a hand on her shoulder. "For your own protection, for the sake of your sanity, and for your protection as well, I am afraid that I cannot allow you to remember what has happened here. But the baby, he shared with you some of the knowledge that is awakening in his mind, and much of it is knowledge that mankind is not yet ready for. I also promised Zeus and Jeb, that no mortal should learn about our affair and the baby's true parentage. I am very sorry." Gabrielle looked around the cloud room, then finally at the baby. "Can I say goodbye?" Newitt smiled. "Of course." The goddess held the baby out. Gabrielle took the baby and held him close. "You've been quite the little visitor, haven't you?" The baby replied by wrapping one of its hands around Gabrielle's finger. "I'm going to miss you," she whispered to it. "Then, even if I can't remember what you gave to me, I want to give you something to remember me by. It's a lullaby I remember from when I was a child. I never knew who used to sing it to me or when it came from, but I want to give it to you now." And then she sang, "May the night be your friend, and may dreams rock you gently. May you never know hunger, and may you love with a full heart, and may the bright, smiling stars light your way until the wind sets you free." Then she could sing no more. She kissed the baby on its forehead, then gave him back to his mother. From behind her, she could hear Xena say, "Gabrielle?" "Yes?" She turned to face her friend. "I want you to know that from this day forward, I shall never, never doubt your judgment or abilities again. You show me that the heart can be stronger than any weapon. You proved yourself the equal of any warrior. of any 10 warriors. I just wanted you to know that. Gabriel stared at her for a moment, blinked, and said, Nearly dying has made you all squishy. I don't think I like it. Argo shuffled her agreement. A moment later, the cloud room filled with a light purple vapor, which Gabrielle breathed in deeply. Xena and Gabrielle came awake to find themselves sitting at a table at the staggering Satar Tavern. The tables were littered with the wineskins and tankards, and people were passed out all over the floor. Argo was just standing there, snorting and pawing the straw-covered floor and staring down at them quizzically. What the? Croaked Xena. The remains of a cake of some sort lay on the platter in the center of the table. Where are we? Asked Gabrielle. Xena looked around and shrugged. I'm not sure. I remember that we were on the road to Amphipolis, and her eyes suddenly grew wide. Oh no, what is it? Xena pointed toward the tavern doorway. I think we're already here. There. I mean, one hell of a party, wasn't it? Said Xena's mother from the tavern doorway. Never in my life did I dream that my daughter would give me a birthday party that lasted nearly 2 days. She approached the table and stood over Xena, smiling. Looks like the two of you don't remember much. That's one way of putting it, said Gabrielle. Well, no matter, as long as you enjoyed yourselves. Oh, yes, said Xena, very highly convincingly. It was one hell of a party. Good, said her mother, then leaned down. Now, dear daughter, where's my present? This next one, the last one for today, as fate would have it, by Jody Lynn Nye. Sounds like you had quite an adventure, sir, the tavern maid said, refilling the chief mercenary's mug. Indeed we did, the man said, gulping down a draught of beer and dashing his hand against his scruffy beard to clear away the foam. What chance did we have with her jumping here, there, and everywhere, screaming like a fury, and throwing that flat round thing? The tall woman in bronze and leather at the end of the bar clapped a circlet of metal down on the rough plank counter. Chakram, said Xena, but I've never been to Parcelion. Parcelion? Xena! The mercenaries leaped up, scattering benches and chairs in their haste to get away. They forgot to open the tavern door. 3 man-shaped holes in the wall dropped dust down to the dirt floor. Funny, her small blonde companion said, watching them go. Usually have to throw them through the wall. Xena sat down on the bench as the tavern owner and his staff hurried to clean up the mess. That's the third band of thugs who said they met me in Barcalion. They have to be mistaken, Gabrielle said, frowning at a lamb bone before returning it to her empty trencher. You're right, of course, Xena said dryly. There are so many warriors matching my description in Greece. So we're going? Gabrielle asked brightly. Of course, Xena pursed her lips in a small smile. I want to know how my reputation was managed to precede me so effectively. It can't be far now, Gabrielle said, pulling on her mount's reins. They had been riding into the mountains for 3 days, and her rear was getting a little sore. The mare danced to a halt. no doubt glad of the break too. Gabrielle swiveled her head around to study the olive orchards on the hillsides the road wound through. The man back in the last village said we'd be there when we found trees already in fruit. Here they are. It's amazing. Only a dozen miles back, the trees are still flowering. Strange, isn't it? Xena said, studying the heavy gray-green clusters and the profusion of dully gleaming leaves clinging to the branches of the trees. She pinched an olive and felt the flesh already thick on the seed, almost as if spring comes earlier for them here than other places. The road is in good shape, Gabrielle pointed out. They must be well off to be able to maintain the track so well. No potholes, even though the rains have been heavy this season. And look at those fences. How they get last fences to stay together so well. The wood has an even grade. I don't know, Xena said. The gods favor them for some reason. Her horse raised his head and whickered. He smells blood, Xena said, raising her head too. Her keen ears picked up the distant but unmistakable sounds of metal on metal. There's a fight up ahead. She dug her heels into the stallion's side. Hee-haw! Yaw! The golden horse shot away. Gabriel sighed and kicked her mount into a gallop to follow. I suppose it's no use suggesting the subtle approach. To Gabrielle's experienced eye, the village did indeed seem to be blessed by the gods. The surrounding fields were burden, burgeoning with crops. Grain fields under the wide blue skies were full of swaying golden stalks. Fat melons and plenty sprawled along healthy, large-leafed vines. Grapes glowed like green jewels among the leaves in the vineyards. The sheepfolds were loud with the high-pitched bleating of spring lambs. All the buildings beyond the entry gate had been well built of wood and stone and painted in brilliant colors. The only jarring note was the battle going on in the center of the town market. I'm sorry, excuse me for the interruption. I gotta. mm, I'll come back and try to finish it. Just wait for here. I'll be back. I'm back. I wanted to give me something to drink as well. There's my throat. I'll continue this. I don't have to go through it so fast. And I marked the place where I left off. I'm so thirsty. Oh, after this, I'm going to get out the kittens again for a second time. I love these big glasses. Whew. And I'm almost over something that's been really bothering me this week. I mean, it's really been kicking my butt. I caught myself on that one. Derriere. Whew. Okay. Romans, Gabrielle shouted to her companion. At least 20 of the red-cloaked foe were scattered through the village square, either breaking down doors or fighting hand to hand. The townsfolk defended their homes, but they had only makeshift weapons and little skill in the art of war. Xena had evidently already noted the enemy's presence and decided on a course of action. She shrilled, spurring her horse into the midst of the town square. She drew her sword, stood up in the saddle, and somersaulted into the thickest part of the action, landing feet first on the back of a surprised Roman. By the time Gabrielle pulled up, unsheathing her twin battle knives, the tall woman had already engaged four legionaries armed with gladi and long, square-topped shields. By the look of surprise and dismay on their faces, Gabrielle guessed they never dreamed that a raid on a small Greek town would bring down a legendary one-woman protection forced upon them. Two women, she corrected herself hastily, though she admired Xena and thought of her first when it came to puissance in battle. She was half of this fellowship. They stood together now and forever. She vaulted out of her saddle and ran to help. If the citizens of Persilion were taken aback to see a 6 foot black haired warrior maiden or a 5 foot something blonde knife wielding Amazon leap into their midst. They covered it well. The Romans, on the other hand, were surprised. Xena gave them no time to rest. She dodged from side to side behind a cart full of vegetables as one soldier stabbed at her with a short sword, spearing gourds, onions, and lettuce instead of his intended prey. He lost sight of her for a moment and cast around, letting his sword drop. Xena burst out from amid a display of baskets and kicked the surprised man in the chin with one sweep of her booted foot. booted foot. The soldier went over backward. His companions rushed into attack, but their huge shields got in the way within the light quarters, preventing them from maneuvering. Xena let out a wild yell and spun, coming up under the guard of the third man. She grasped his sword arm, twisted the weapon out of his wrist, and swung him hard against his friends. Their banded breastplates clanged, and she swung her partner again. His head knocked into his companions, one after the other. All three men fell to the ground unconscious. These are pretty soft, Xena said, dusting her hands together. Caesar ought to be ashamed of the way his empire has declined. She looked around for her next opponent. No! A woman's voice screamed from across the small agora. Xena shoved her way through the milling crowd to a small cloth shop. The owner's a pleasant-faced woman with brown hair and a nervous, pudgy, black-haired man barricaded the door with their own bodies, trying to prevent a trio of legionaries and their decorion from entering. The unarmed weavers had no chance of keeping the soldiers out for long. Xena strode over and tapped the officer on the shoulder. "Pardon me," she said. The officer turned his head. She elbowed him in the jaw, then swept the chakram out of her belt with her free hand and flicked it into the air. The two soldiers attacked with swords. She only had to parry with them each briefly before the shining ring ricocheted off 3 walls and bounced off their foreheads. The chakra made its last strike and rebounded into Xena's hand. She observed, satisfied, as the men staggered backward against the nearby wall, eyes crossed. When they recovered their wits, they started running out of the village, pursued by the rest of their troop. The officer crawled, then stumbled to his feet. "Halt!" he cried. "What about the child of fortune?" He looked back at Xena and the others missing behind him, then ran after his men. Gabriel came to stand beside Xena, sheathing her knives. "What does that mean?" Xena raised an eyebrow, watching the Romans flee down the road. "I don't know, but we're going to find out." Once the enemy was out of sight, the citizens became began to clean up the town. Wounded men and women were loaded into stretchers and carried into the tavern. Let's see if we can be of any help, Xena suggested to Gabrielle. The two of them followed into the hall. Gabrielle looked around, her heart going out to the injured who lay moaning, while others flitting around them with medical impedimenta. The weaver who had been defending his shop was bent over the litter of a boy whose arm had been slashed. He straightened up with a start as Xena approached him. Xena! The weaver gulped. How pleased we are to see you, warrior princess. You saved us all. And Gabrielle, we are grateful for your help in our time of need. And you are? Xena asked pointedly. Claudius, the headman of this village, the man said, sketching a deep bow to each of them. He tugged the collar of his tunic, clearly nervous. Forgive my manners. I should have introduced myself at once. Your fame precedes you, fair ladies, I presumed. I feel as though we already know you. That's interesting, Xena said, looking around. Nice place you have here. But I've never seen it before, have I? No, I assure you, warrior princess, that this is the first time you visited our town. Welcome, welcome. We will have a feast in your honor, you and Lady Gabrielle, for defeating the Romans who would have pillaged our homes. Just as soon as we have cared for the injured. That's not necessary, Xena began. Please, Claudius threw his arms wide. He seemed fond of grand gestures. Let us show our gratitude. We have wine, fruit, meat, good bread. As he spoke, the tavern owner and his family hurried to the cooking area and began to bustle around with cooking pots. Other townsfolk hurried out and returned with more tables and benches and two large chairs that they set at one end of the grandest table, almost, Xena thought, as if they had rehearsed the exercise. They carefully kept from making eye contact with her and her companion. Gabriel said in a low voice, Romans don't just raid houses for nothing. What were they looking for? I don't know. I think Claudius and the others are trying to get up the courage to tell us. And so I wish to offer a toast to those brave warriors brought to us by fate, just when our needs were the greatest. I give you Xena and Gabrielle. Claudius, standing at the foot of the table, raised his goblet to the visitors, and the others echoed him. Xena offered them a small smile that went no farther back than her lips. The simple room had been transformed from a tavern and a makeshift hospital to a beautiful dining hall. An expensive embroidered cloth covered the boards of the table, with individual cloths to match at each place. Goblets and trenchers of colored glass picked up the winking firelight from the torches and lamps overhead. Platters of food and pitchers of wine, water, and ale were replenished by the healthy young servers as soon as they were emptied. Two youths with lyre and sistrum sang throughout dinner. They had unusually good voices. Xena knew most of the tunes and would have enjoyed joining in, but she held back. Until she found out precisely what was going on, she didn't want to allow her guard to drop. No one would meet their eyes for long. I have to admit, the food was as good as they promised, Gabrielle said, pushing back a little from the green plate before her. Almost as though we're being fattened up for the kill, Xena commented dryly. Gabrielle almost told her she was being too suspicious. But the furtive atmosphere was beginning to irk her too. She began to regret the fennel salad and that second helping of raspberry puree mixed with snow. Do you think there's poison in the food? No, I think it's something in the air. Time to clear it. She cleared her throat and stood up. Citizens of Parcelion, you honor us with your generosity. We've enjoyed your feast and the entertainment, but I think it's about time you tell us the truth. The lyre and sistrum rattled into silence. Oh, excuse me. The men and women around the table blanched, glancing furtively at one another. Xena went on relentlessly, turning to catch each person's eyes before they hid their gaze from hers. I've run into a number of strangers recently who say they met me here in person alone. You all know I've never set foot here before, so they have to have seen someone else. Xena let her voice go cold. I don't like it when someone impersonates me. I don't have to meet her, but you'd better tell her that the charade is over. Claudia sprang up. I swear to you, good lady, that no one in our village has ever pretended to be you. Xena glared at him. Are you telling me that all those people were mistaken? No, warrior princess, Claudia said, hanging his head. Well, if you haven't got one or more people pretending to be me, who beat up those men? Claudius twitched with discomfort. You did. I did? Xena said, taken back. She exchanged incredulous glances with Gabrielle. She's been ready for a confrontation with a country girl in homemade leather armor or a retired swords mistress. How? No, never mind. Why? We needed your help, Xena, the weaver's wife. This rose from her seat. Claudius gestured, gestured to her to sit down. You will surely have noticed the beauty of our town. We have been well favored by the gods. Our children are never ill. They grow strong and beautiful. As you have seen, our crops are more plentiful than any of our neighbors. The sheep always bear twin lambs, and the cows and goats give more milk than we can ever use. But you must not think that we are greedy. We share always with those who are less fortunate. And what is the source of all your good luck? Xena asked. After exchanging glances with her husband, Thisbe brought forward a ruby-haired girl of about 6 years of age. She was dressed in the same fabrics as the others, but on her the fine linen seemed to shine. Her large, appealing eyes were a heavenly blue, and she had a sweet smile. My foster daughter, Thisbe said. She's beautiful. Xena knelt down beside her and clasping her small hands in her large ones. Hello, I'm Xena. What's your name? I am, the girl said. This child, is she why everyone has been invading your village? Yes, Claudia said. What's so special about her? Nothing. But Xena could tell the weaver was lying. She lost patience with him. Why do they call her the child of fortune? Gabrielle asked. I heard the Romans say that as they were leaving. Er, she's our luck, Claudius said nervously. His calloused hands twisted in the fabric of his tunic. She means a great deal to us here, and it's why you've helped us so often, or rather, why you will. Not me, Xena said coldly, rising to her feet. Our work here is done. We'll be going now. Thank you for the feast. Oh, but warrior princess, you must stay, this said, wringing her hands. There's no must about it, Xena said, looking at her curiously. Why would I need to protect one little girl when she has a whole village to raise her? You have enough wealth to build a castle to hide her away from anything. We don't want to do that, Claudia said. Why not? It would keep her from harm. Claudius put out a hand in appeal. We want her to grow up happy. If we shut her away, she won't be able to run to play in the sun with other children. We want her to enjoy being a child. Xena was touched by the simplicity of the answer. Then what? She's clearly old enough to go back to her mother and her aunts. We only need to care for her a little longer. I wish you good luck in doing it, Xena said, patting the girl's hand before letting go. Come on, Gabrielle. She strode toward the door of the tavern. The others sprang up from their places to follow, as she knew they would. Oh, please, Tisba begged. You can't go. We need your help. Xena spun on her heel so that Claudius nearly ran into her. He stepped back a pace, intimidated. Then tell me the truth. All of it. The expression on their faces shifted from terror to worry to resignation. Very well, Claudius said, torn between needing her to know and not wanting to admit to a very angry warrior that she'd been lured into a situation without her knowledge. Ianthe is the daughter of Lachesis. Lachesis? Xena asked, raising her eyebrows. The fate? Yes, this was said. She was brought here to us at her birth. Parcelion was founded in service to the fates, the Parcae. Lachesis brought her to us. It is impossible for her to take her eyes off the work of keeping every life in the world running smoothly. They care for even the gods' strands of life. You know how it is for a working woman. She knew who better, that Claudius and I could not have children of our own. We offered to raise her as our own until she was of an age to go back to Olympus. In return, Claudius said hoarsely, our crops are plentiful. No one falls sick or even has a run of bad luck. In 6 years, we've never seen a locust or a weevil. But 6 months ago, word leaked out that we had a child of fortune in the village, a misunderstanding of what she really is, a child of fate. They thought we had treasure. In a way we did, Thisbe said, looking ashamed. Our good fortunes would cease if she was stolen from us. That's when we started to let it be known that you were protecting her. And you did, the girl said. She made her way between the adults and came over to Xena. She held out a mirror made of crystal in her small hands. See? Xena scooped to look into it. At first, the warrior saw only her own face before she could protest that nothing was happening. The image swirled into gray nothingness. Then a shadowy figure, wrapped in a cloak, flanked by two other figures, approached a visibly younger Claudius and Thisbe and handed them a small bundle. Scenes flitted by of the baby Zenith growing into a child, playing with her friends. More scenes unfurled before Xena of the people of Parcalion giving alms to the needy, making offerings in their temple, opening celebration to visitors. Xena felt awe. The child was a seer. These are good people, Ion's high voice said. They meant well, truly. This is what would have happened had you not come. The visions became darker. One after another, Xena watched as groups of intruders invaded the village each time. People were wounded or killed, and the village burned and destroyed. The carnage was horrific. Men and women alike died by the sword, or by fire, or by torture. The child herself was taken prisoner or slain by greedy barbarians, or Romans or thieves. Gabrielle, beside Xena, made a choking noise and headed outside. Xena herself continued to watch, grim-faced until the visions ended and the crystal went blank. She took a deep breath, wrenching herself with relief back to the present. But these disasters didn't occur. She said, "She's alive. This is because you saved us," Claudius admitted. "Otherwise, she is dead many times over. Her enemies would have succeeded without you." How is it that I helped you but can't remember doing it?" Claudius's mouth opened and closed several times before he could produce words. We we stole from your future to defend our present." "That sounds like it would take divine power," Xena said, frowning. "Does Ianthe also possess the power of the gods to play with the order of humans' lives?" "No," said a voice behind Xena, "but we do." Xena turned immediately on guard. Three women stood in the hall, silhouetted against the golden light of the torches. The golden-haired one at the left, holding a distaff, was young and pretty. The wrinkled crone at the right held a pair of shears that gleamed with the same silver as her hair. The auburn-haired woman in the middle, with the measuring tape in her hand, resembled Ianthe so closely. Xena knew at once the villagers had been telling the truth. Clotho, Atropos, and Lachesis, mother of Ianthe, the Fates. The townsfolk dropped to their knees. "Greetings, Xena," Clotho said. "You don't seem surprised to see us." "No more than you are," she said, standing at ease with her hand braced on her belt. Gabrielle reappeared at her side. Her friend was a little pale, but she stood tall. "The people of Leon appealed to us for a champion to defend my daughter," Lachius said. "You're the chosen one. You have served well, or you will. No, Xena said flatly. I don't like being forced into fights that are not my business. Not even for the sake of mercy? This asked. She came up to wrap an arm around her foster daughter's shoulders. Xena glared down at her. You never asked me to help. You assumed that I would. This cringed, holding the little girl close, and buried her head against his bosom. Great warrior, I don't know what else we could offer you in exchange, but you'd be saving this child's life. You saw the visions. This is what will happen. What will have happened if you leave now. Please help us protect her. I love her. She is my heart. Xena snorted. Gabrielle knew her friend was thinking hard. She had a soft spot for children, and the little girl was pretty and charming. Ianthe came over to take Xena's hand and looked up into her eyes. That seemed to make up Xena's mind for her. All right, she said, turning back to the Fates. Tell me how and what. All things are fated to happen, Atropos said in her creaky voice. You would have met all of these ruffians and brigands later on. But for the sake of my niece, we tied the strands of your life into loops so those encounters would occur earlier in their lives. She nodded to her sister Clotho, who gently picked through the bank of threads in her hand to pull forth a robust strand of darkened bronze, twisted into complicated knots. Xena eyed it. And how many people will die in the future because I wouldn't be present at those other encounters? If you aid us, Atropos smiled, her thin mouth another wrinkle in her lined face. None. You will fight the battles that have come before and are to come. If you agree, there'll be no more beyond those. We know. Gabrielle looked at the face suspiciously. How many? Claudius fidgeted. 4 bands of thieves in the last 2 months. 4? Xena exclaimed. 6 in all, the headman admitted. 6? Plus one that you dispatched today. Atropos said, but there are 3 yet to come. You must defeat them all to protect Ianthe. 9 battles? Xena asked. You're asking too much. The people of Park of Leon burst out in protest. But warrior princess, Dispus said, you already have fought them. Please, Xena, you're a mother too. Save my child. Atropos swept her hand across, cutting off all argument. I'll offer you an inducement, Xena, the crone said. If you will be my niece's champion, I promise you this. In days to come, when death is certain, if you call upon me, I will hold back my shears. I make this offer to no one lightly. You will make the decision to use it. I give you free will. What do you say? Xena smiled grimly at the demi-goddesses. You already know I'm going to do it, don't you? And not just for a get out of Hades free card. I'll do it for her. Of course, said Lachesis placidly, it's foreordained. I don't believe in fate, no. We know, Clotho said with a smile, but we believe in you. All right, Xena let her voice drop to a cold whisper. She looked the fates in the eyes one by one. Let's get it over with. Wait, Gabrielle blurted out. I can help. I have to be with her. You are, Latius assured her. Clotho displayed the twisted cord of Xena's life. Another lighter strand of blue and silver was wound tightly against it and tied through three of the loops. The thread of your life is twined with hers. Gabrielle stood back, pleased, embarrassed, and honored all at the same time. Well, all right then. Xena drew her sword and chakram and braced her feet on the ground. Let's do it, she said. Clotho spun out the bronze thread and passed it to Launchus, and the second fate drew out the second section, swung it into a loop, and crossed the strands. Xena was plunged into a moonless night. It took a moment for her vision to clear. When it did, she realized she was standing in the middle of the market square. Only the tiniest flickers of fire peeked out through curtains and shutters. The village slept. She became aware of figures moving stealthily toward the village gate. In the faint starlight, she could see that the wings of the gate stood ajar. The shadows moved erratically. They were coping with a heavy and irregular bundle that wiggled. A stray starbeam glanced off bronze hair as the child aunt wrenched her face away from whatever the villains had covering it. She let out a shrill cry for help. Dogs woke up and began to bark. The sounds of stirring arose in the house as people stumbled out to see what was wrong. Aunt! This was a voice cried in the darkness. Claudius appeared behind her, bearing a torch just crackled to life. The kidnappers broke into a run. Xena was right behind them. Burdened as they were, they couldn't move very fast. Xena circled around and met them at the gate, which she shut behind her with a clang. She counted 6 figures, men in the sound of their breathing, poachers or worse. By their stench, her eyes were getting used to the dark now. Ian's face was a pale dot. Put her down and you won't get hurt, Xena advised him. Get her, a hoarse voice whispered. She heard the unmistakable whisper of metal leaving leather sheaths. Xena warbled. She brought up a foot and kicked the first man in the face. The villagers ran up with torches while she dispatched one of the ruffians after another. As soon as the last man was on the ground, Anayas was restored to her weeping foster mother's arms. The scene changed. Xena found herself blinking in strong sunshine on the hillside on the road a little way out of Parcalion. A party of 4 steep raiders, clad in black leather, and armed to the teeth, were riding toward the village. She addressed them with her perch beside a cluster of olive trees. You're far from home, she said, surprised. They looked up. You wouldn't be looking for an easy target, would you? Because I have to disappoint you. Swords hissed out of scabbards as the men spurred their sweating horses up the hill toward her. Xena grabbed hold of an overhanging branch and swung herself at the lead rider. He was too canny to fall for a trick like that. He reined his horse around sharply to the right. That gave Xena the opportunity to leap into the saddle behind him and grab him around the throat. and she turned her sword pommel down, knocking off the man's helmet, and hit him sharply over the skull. He sagged, and she threw him off the horse. The body rolled down under the horses' hooves of the other horses and making them dance. Xena brought her unwitting mount the rest of the way around in a circle and charged the three warriors. It didn't take long. It didn't take her long to deal with the remaining raiders. She took out on them the frustration she was feeling against the fates. How dare they claim that her every action was foreordained? She knew she had free will, and that she alone made the decisions as to what she would do. Xena herself against an onslaught by one of the grinning warriors who rode toward her with sword held high. Without thinking, she whispered the charcoal out of her belt. No, she thought, that's probably what they are ordering me to do. Instead, she dragged her sword around and felt the satisfying strike of metal on metal. She screamed her war cry, spurring her horse in the face of her enemy. They didn't stand a chance against her. None of them did. By the time she was finished, the townsfolk had heard a noise and come running out to see what was going on. In the crowd, Xena spotted Thisbe cuddling lions, who watched her with those old eyes. The third raid was conducted by Phoenicians, who had no doubt been the first ones to misinterpret fate as fortune. They didn't want bloodshed and were happy to flee intact, promising never to return to that part of Greece. Fourth and fifth were gangs of thugs and common thieves who had sworn they'd met Xena in Barcaleon before. She was glad to understand at last that not only were they not mistaken, but time was beginning to fall into its normal order. She was relieved. 6 battles at full fever pitch were beginning to tell on her, coming on top of a full day's fighting with Roman legionaries and a rich meal. She sensed that her reactions were slowing slightly. This is surreal, Gabriel said, watching Xena deal with the mercenaries they had encountered in the tavern 3 days before. She's here beside us, but she can't see us. Her friends seem to exist within the boundaries of an arena that began within arm's reach of the feast tables. On an evening inside the circle, Xena was outside in daylight. She stands with one foot in the future and one in the past, Atropos said. Without looking at Gabrielle, one of the unshaven men leaped on Xena's back and tried to strangle her with a cord. She struggled, her face growing red. 2 men, the worst for having taken some telling punches and strikes from Xena, staggered toward her, swords drawn. Xena lifted her feet, letting all her weight hang from her neck and kicked out, sending the mercenaries reeling. She let her legs drop, bent over, and threw the third man over her head. He fell on the fourth man. Lachesis watched avidly from Clotho's skin She chose a thread and held it out to Atropos. He snicked it short. The third man got up and shook his companion's shoulder, but the fourth man didn't move. Gabrielle watched the goddesses in horror. Until that moment, she hadn't really believed in their power. Now she had proof before her. They had the power of life and death, which they exercised without the least trace of emotion. Taken aback by the death of their fellow adventurer, the remaining three backed away from Xena, who pursued them, ululating all the while. Only Gabrielle, who knows her so well, realized that Xena was beginning to flag. "Let me help her," she pleaded with the Fates. "Of course," said Clotho, spinning out the bronze thread between her fingers. There appeared to be a knot, but it wasn't a flaw. Gabrielle's blue and silver strand joined in at that point. She only had time to say thanks, for she was swept up into the action. Xena was whisked away from her side of the mercenaries, running away. She saw a brief flash of the Romans arriving and Parkilon, the lion, and herself arriving at the gates. Suddenly she felt a comforting presence at her back. Familiar Gabrielle. "Hi," the blonde woman said, peering over her shoulder. "Can I play too?" Xena smiled. "I thought you'd never ask." They found themselves in a field of withered leaves and torn vines. Gabrielle guessed the scene to be winter, with the crops long gathered in, but the new planting not yet done. Around them were at least 20 rough-dressed men, armed with rusty swords and farm implements. This was the future, she reminded herself. These were things that hadn't happened yet. Time was yet unformed. They were now affecting what was to come. It felt godlike. She didn't have time to explore the sensation before the enemy moved in on them. She drew her knives and stood at the ready. Together, she and Xena saw off the first gang who had since easy pickings and were readily scared off by the presence of experienced warriors. The next incursion consisted of two strong, fierce women, rogue soldiers from Lesbos, who had to be nearly killed before they would withdraw. Gabrielle took a few deep breaths as the chakram whizzed back into Xena's hand. The scene changed. They were back in the agora. Romans seemed to pour in from everywhere, shoving the market carts aside, knocking people to the ground as they broke into every house and searching for the child Ianthe. "They've called in an entire century," Xena said grimly. She was breathing very heavily now. Gabrielle was worried. They had to defeat the foe to return to their normal place in their lifelines. How could they battle so many soldiers? Gabrielle spotted Thisbe and Ianthe running into an alleyway behind their home. A dozen legionaries funneled in after them. Xena reached out to snag Claudius away from two Roman soldiers who were beating him. She brought his face close to hers. Where does that go? She demanded, pointing. Is there a way to head them off? Claudius saw his wife and foster child disappear with the Romans in pursuit. He yelled, "Follow me." He led them into another small street. Xena could hear men shouting to one another and hoped they hadn't yet caught up with Ianthe. To her relief, the woman and girl emerged from the narrow passage. Thisbe gasped when she saw Xena and ran toward her. Ianthe cried out and stumbled, falling to her hands and knees. "Ianthe!" Thisbe started back toward her. Xena grabbed the woman and swung her into Gabrielle's arms. "Hold on to her." Xena started running as the Romans came pouring out. She screamed a war cry that startled some of the legionaries into halting. It was enough of a distraction for her to pull her chakram and send it ricocheting off the stone walls of the alley. The steel circlet knocking into the temples and jaws of several men, taking them out of the equation. The quarters were tight enough that the rest of the men had to climb over their fellows to get at her. But the first soldier was still standing. It was the same man Xena had defeated before. Could it only have been that afternoon? He clenched his teeth in a bitter smile as the two of them circled the child cowered between them at their feet. Xena watched the Roman's eyes, waiting to see where he would strike. He swept up his gladius. Xena countered, raising her sword to catch his blade. He parried and stabbed upward, trying to get under her guard. Their swords rasped together to the hilts. Xena could smell sweat, fear, and garlic on him. He disengaged, shifted a few feet to the side, and lunged again. Xena admired his skill even as she diverted his stroke, knocking his blade out of line. The Roman didn't like being bested. His eyes ablaze, he leaped at her. Xena sidestepped and smacked him on the back, sending him staggering. She had to twist suddenly to avoid landing on the weeping Ianthe. Off balance, Xena's heels skidded on the smooth flagged street. She went down, dropping her sword. The Roman wheeled around and leaped across her prone body. She grabbed for his booted foot, but missed. He stood over her, his sword raised on high. Xena braced herself, but he didn't chop at her. Instead, with a vicious smile, the Roman brought his weapon down toward Ianthe's head. The girl screamed. Xena struck out a desperate hand. Ianthe was just out of her reach. Xena cried out, "Archibald, no!" The man froze in place, the sword's edge just a hair's breadth away from its target. All the combatants had stopped moving. The fates shimmered into existence beside Xena. She got to her feet. "So you used my gift for her," Archibald said, with her wintry smile. A narrow pink thread rested within the open maw of her sister's. She drew the shears away, leaving the strand intact. "Generous of you. You know I couldn't have it any other way." Xena said. Of course not, Latches said. This clutched the girl to her bosom and brushed her off, making motherly clucking noises all the while. Thy will withdraw now, Atropos said. He was angry at you for losing his commission. It was not a good enough reason to return here. He will retire in disgrace. Your task is at an end. There will be no more attacks. Xena straightened up and sheathed her sword. Good. She waited for a moment. The Fates stood smiling at her as the scene around them blurred. They found themselves back in the dimly lit feast hall. You have our thanks, Clotho said. And ours, Claudius added, swinging his arms wide as if to embrace the warriors. You are welcome here any time. We will throw another feast for you. We will sing your praises. I think we've had enough. We've seen enough of Park Leon, Xena said, backing away from his exuberance. Now and forever. She walked to the door and glanced back at Gabrielle. Are you coming? And we're leaving again, without getting a chance to rest, and without any kind of reward, Gabrielle said, shifting in her saddle. Not only did her rear end still hurt, but her muscles ached from fighting. She had a number of bruises and grazes from bumping into stone walls. Except having saved that child from her enemies, Xena said, staring straight ahead. She too sat her horse gingerly. After 10 battles, she must have been sore all over, which you would have anyway, Gabrielle pointed out. It's a shame that Atropos didn't give you another second chance to keep for yourself. That would come in useful in the future. Xena smiled ruefully, meeting her eyes at last. She knew I was going to use it to save Ions. I was never meant to be able to keep it for later. That's really unfair. After all you did for them. Xena shook her head. They never give anything away. Fate isn't generous. You should know that by now. That, Gabrielle said, is why I like people more than gods. Maybe we have done some good, Xena said thoughtfully. We've ensured that that child has time to learn more about human ways before she returns to Olympus. Perhaps she'll come to change things. Now that, Gabrielle said with a grin, is a future I'd like to see. Okay. That's it for tonight. Ah, whew. Ooh, which one was your favorite? Two dealing with children, but I do favor the Star Child too. So that's all for now. I hope everyone is safe, has a good time, and have fun. Be safe. Uh, Ciao for now.